Good morning. I'm taking up the first module of the subject linguistics, and the paper is Pragmatics and Discourse Analysis. The content writers are Imtiaz Hasnan and Rajneesh Arora, and right now Imtiaz Hasnan is presenting this module. We are talking about pragmatics and discourse analysis. You are all familiar with the notion of syntax, semantics, phonetics, morphology. Now we'll take up something which is called pragmatics. When we take up pragmatics, let us understand this pragmatics by taking one very simple example. I'm uttering a sentence which is, what did you mean that I ought to have been more careful in social media? Now, to know what the utterance means basically entails knowledge, the meaning of the word carries in the sentences. The task of knowing the meaning of the words is accomplished by semantics. But who will tell us why the sentence has been uttered? Why has it been uttered at all? And when and what were the motives behind uttering these sentences? What were the intentions of the producers? What are the circumstances that prompted the utterance and in this particular sentence? Neither syntax nor semantics can answer these questions. Syntacticians are more concerned with the construction, the way the sentences are constructed as a part of the formal analysis. Semanticists are concerned to provide meaning, that is, the sentence has a meaning which are being produced. But what we need now is the addition to the construction of a sentence and the meaning is what exactly is the intent of the speaker, the context of the language in which it has been used, rather than truth, reference, or grammar. Why? Because the above sentence also carries additional baggage of meaning and information. These are hidden and allow us to draw certain inferences regarding its intended meaning. Has this sentence been uttered by decoder in response to warning, scolding, or a polite suggestion offered by the encoder? Does the utterance reflect annoyance, displeasure, disapproval of the decoder over what has been uttered by him? These are additional baggage of meaning. The inferences can be drawn only if one is sharing the context or situation in which the utterance is occurring. This is the domain of pragmatics. It provides an account of the sentence, of how sentences are used in utterances to convey various aspects of context dependent linguistic information and interpretation. Now there is an interface that is between semantics and pragmatics. The field of study of semantics and pragmatics are related and complementary. The common concern with the transmission of meaning through language. This makes the boundary between semantics and pragmatics fuzzy. What contributes to the difference between semantics and pragmatics is actually the usage. Semantics, on the one hand, is concerned with describing meaning independent of particular usage. It is the literal meaning of a sentence. Pragmatics, on the other hand, describes meaning in relation to users, that is, the speakers and hearers, by situating it in a given context. Meaning, from a semantic point of view, is asocial, abstract, based on truth conditions. For instance, where did you find this pen? This sentence, on its face value, appears to be a question, soliciting location, that is, the place where the pen has been found. But this is purely linguistic based semantic interpretation. It is devoid of any information deriving out of sense of belief, motive, or intention associated with speaker in context of the situation. These information are crucial to interpretation and thus considered important for pragmaticians. Semantics, pragmatics, interpretation cover Discourse, cohesion, presupposition and entailment, and cooperative principles and implication. What is Discourse? I'll briefly touch upon these topics because they have already been taken up in detail in the subsequent modules. Discourse, the intelligibility of a word in any language is a function of stability of its meaning. It is the communal nature, the meaning of the word in a given language that makes the language an efficient social code of communication. Certain words, however, display a deviation from the protocol. As a result, they have different references depending upon a change in person, place, or time. The meaning of the deviance can only be interpreted provided the hearer or reader possesses knowledge of the pragmatic and contextual aspects in which the word is embedded. Such a class of words whose interpretation of meaning depends on the knowledge about the situational and contextual features is called deixis, derived from the Greek word for pointing. Presupposition and entailment. Presupposition involves proposition that are associated with pre-existing knowledge about the way the world is and with which both the speaker and the hearer are aware of. Entailment is about the knowledge derived logically, that is, through semantic processes from an utterance. Cohesion. It brings unity in the text and ties one part of the text with another part at the surface level. Cooperative principles and implicature. Implicatures are meanings that depend on utterances and not on sentence meaning, and where the inferences cannot be predicted solely from the knowledge of the system of sense relations between sentences. According to Grice, implicature arises because of the observance or flouting of certain principles or maxims called the cooperative principles. He propounded these requirements in terms of four conversational maxims, namely quality, quantity, relation, and manner. Speech act theory. It stems from the school of philosophy called ordinary language philosophy, attributed to John L. Austin. It was popularized by his pupil John Searle. It believes that language is used not only to describe phenomena in the real world, but also to do things. In this theory, language is seen as a form of acting. Austin believes that uttering of a sentence is an action, as there are many different things we can do with language. For instance, the meaning in a sentence, "I bet it will not rain tomorrow," cannot be assigned to truth conditions, nor it is intended to be an event. Rather, it is performing an action that constitutes a bet. Similarly, Austin informs us that sentences like "I now pronounce you man and a wife" is uttered to perform the action of wedding, rather than just proving or providing description related to the propositional content of the language. Speech act theory is concerned with how an utterance constitutes doing, or how words are deeds. Philosopher of ordinary language study the performances of acts through words, such as promising, ordering, requesting, refusing, complaining, apologizing, to understand individuals' behavior. Now we must understand the difference between a sentence meaning and utterance meaning. Though meaning is common to both semantics and pragmatics, it is used differently by each of them. From the abstract meaning, pragmatics moves towards utterance meaning for arriving at the speaker's intent in uttering X in the context of Y. We have already mentioned before, semanticists are interested in the study of sentence or literal or structural meaning, which involves truth conditions. Pragmaticians are concerned with the study of utterances or speaker meaning. They draw inferences not only from the sentence meaning, but also from what it conveys about speaker attitude, beliefs, social roles, and type of situation. They believe that communication through language involves the speaker meaning more than is encoded through formal processes of language. Otherwise, how one can explain the interpretation of an utterance, "Can you pass the salt?" as a request and not simply a question. Hence, the question embedded in the formulaic exchange, pleasantries such as क्या हाल है, सब ठीक है ना, may relate to generic health or well-being. But the pragmaticians whose concern is with the utterance meaning, the expected answer goes beyond the sentence or its literal meaning. It may cover and include in its interpretation the level of formality of relationship and sincerity of intention that exists between the speaker and the hearer. Was the addresser really sincere to know the health of the addressee? Has this sentence been uttered to show a nodding familiarity of the presence of or the presence of an acquaintance? The domain of semantics is the literal meaning, which is independent of context. The additional baggage of meaning, which is inferred and or intended from the utterance, is the domain of pragmatics. It is dependent on context. We see in the pragmatics and discourse analysis a frequent occurrence of notions which are context, function, discourse studies, etc. Pragmatics has rightly been described by Riccio in 2009 as the science of language use, that is, parole, or the discursive function of language, including its contextual uniqueness and variability, that is, irregularities. All the concerns of pragmatics is with the aspect of meaning, which is derived contextual and situational media and factors of language use. Context, according to May 2009, refers to all the circumstances that go into defining the backgrounds and goals of the interactants, including what has been and is being and possibility will be said. Understanding the pragmatic aspect of language is a kind of the ability to comprehend and produce a communicative act. It is referred to as pragmatic competence, which often includes one's knowledge about the social distance, social status between the speakers involved, background knowledge about the speaker and the topic of discourse, the use of non-linguistic and cultural knowledge and linguistic knowledge. In the study of meaning, the essential concern of pragmatics is not only specific context of use, but also different cultural background of the users. Any disregard of pragmatic meaning of an utterance may contribute towards misinterpretations or misunderstanding. Fillmore's recount of two anecdotes concerning the fixed phrase, "I thought you would never ask," is worth mentioning here. It's a fairly innocent, teasing expression in American English, but it could easily be taken as insulting by people who did not know its special status as a routine form. In one case, a European man asked an American woman to join him in the dance, and she, being playful, said, "I thought you would never ask." Her potential dancing partner withdrew his invitation in irritation. In another case, a European hostess offered an American guest something to drink. When he unilaterally, assuming a teasing relationship, said, "I thought you'd never ask," he was asked to leave the party for having insulted his host. How do we address the possibilities of miscommunication? Can pragmatics be taught? These are the concerns that are discussed in the last module, Pragmatics and Language Teaching. The exploration of and intervention of language-related real-world problems have been approached by systemic functional linguistics, ethnography, and critical discourse analysis. We will provide a brief outline of all these three approaches. Systemic functional linguistics sets out to explain how humans make meaning and provides both theoretical and practical perspectives for bringing meaning, function, grammar, and context into relationship. Systemic functional linguistics distinguishes three dimensions of meaning and relates each of these to the three functions of language, which its chief architect, Halliday, has outlined as ideational function that corresponds with the propositional content, the interpersonal function that corresponds with the exchange of the perspectives and the expression of attitude, and the textual function which corresponds with the structure of the text as a message. It further maps each of the dimensions of meaning onto different grammatical elements which are labeled functionally. Ethnography, in simple terms, is understood as a branch of sociology that deals with the description and analysis of culture, the beliefs and the practices of ethnic group. Ethnography of speaking or ethnography of communication is an ethnographic approach to study language use in its socio-cultural setting. It represents an interesting discipline to be found at the junction where linguistics meets ethnography. This approach finds its origin in the works of Delheims and John J. Gumpers. Himes has also labeled his approach as socially constituted linguistics because he believes that the linguistic features actually have life and are the outcome of social function. Each speech event can be described and analyzed ethnographically in terms of its components, which Himes captures in the mnemonic device speaking, which is an acronym. Discourse studies. There is a relationship between pragmatics and discourse studies. This relationship can better be understood if we examine the term discourse first. Discourse is some form of linguistic entity. However, in contrast to syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, it is not a name labeling or an academic subject of inquiry in itself. It is a stretch of meaningful linguistic units, either spoken, that is conversational, or written, that is text, or non-verbal, silence, produced for the purpose of communication. As a study of utterance meaning or meaning in context, pragmatics is necessarily concerned with discourse, not with meaning in isolation. In a principled way, it offers the possibility of describing and explaining discourse facts from a linguistic point of view. This is why in many books in pragmatics is often listed as one of the approaches to discourse analysis. Critical discourse analysis, which addresses those issues that inform us how language can mislead or misrepresent in the interest of the powerful at the expense of the relatively powerless. This it does by focusing on the relationship between language, power, and ideology. It employs tools drawn from systemic functional linguistics and also draws insights from social theories to understand asymmetrical power relationships and to explore how language use contributes to privileging certain social groups towards domination and misrepresentation. There are certain similarities and differences between pragmatics and discourse analysis. Contextual use of language brings pragmatics close to discourse analysis. Context, text, that is, chunks of spoken or written discourses, and function are common to both pragmatics and discourse analysis. However, they differ in terms of focus. In pragmatics, discourse is used as data and seeks to draw generalizations that have predicative power concerning our linguistic competence. It gives importance to the social principle and works from a socio-cultural perspective on language usage for examining the way principles of social behavior are expressed. Cooperative principles, politeness principles are the dimensions of pragmatics which have been discussed in later modules. The focus in discourse analysis has been on the individual discourse. Here, the findings of pragmatic theory are used to shed light on how particular set of interlocutors use and interpret language in a specific context. Here the focus is on the large chunks of language beyond the level of sentence, to study how these are organized and how the social transaction imposes a framework on discourse. Exchange structure, conversational analysis, and the dimensions of discourse analysis which have been taken up in the subsequent modules are part of the discourse analysis. Thank you.